Hi, my name is Lydia Arneldison.
My name is Ben Schlichting.
My name is Kieron Parker.
And I'm John Weiler.
And this is our 2020 Coronavirus Year in Review podcast. So, according to the CDC, the first reported outbreak of coronavirus happened in China in December of 2019. The disease has since spread to many countries around the world, including the US. This podcast is a reflection on the virus, the news surrounding it, and the reactions of the people in responses to the pandemic. This discussion is broken into three parts: the beginning of the pandemic, the US shutting down, and where we are today. So, first topic is kind of the beginning of the pandemic and where we started.
So, I think as most of us know already, this pandemic first originated in China, and in a press conference, Anthony Fauci himself actually stated that originally the coronavirus was actually only carried and only affected but what ended up happening is the coronavirus was repeatedly, it was exposed to humans in China, and even though it didn't affect them due to the virus's repeated exposure to the DNA, it was actually able to sort of evolve. The official term is commute, but that's just a fancy scientific term. But basically what ended up happening is the coronavirus, through repeated exposure to human DNA, actually evolved to be able to affect humans. And that's when it started spreading throughout China. And then that's when it started spreading around the world and got to Europe. And then there's a whole mess with Italy. And that's essentially kind of how we got started in this mess.
Kieron, could you list a date for that?
List a
Those
date.
quotes.
All right, I'm not sure. Specific date. I did not put a specific date. Oh, right. Do you mean for the nation or?
Like the quotes when he said that it was started with animals and it wouldn't affect people. I don't know if that was.
Oh yeah. He said that in Face the Nation on March 22nd of 2020. So I believe that was shortly after the virus came to the United States.
Yeah, that bouncing off that, Kieron, I had a news article about a week after that on March 26th, talking about how the US was at that time kind of leading in the world with cases. So we had over 81,000 cases, which was more than Italy had and China had with all their testing at the time. So that was kind of when things started getting really big in the US, kind of in the end of March.
Yeah, I have some information from, excuse me, from the Journal Sentinel. I'm sorry, not Journal Sentinel, but the Wall Street Journal and NPR, when it actually talked about in the beginning of end of January, January 23rd was when President Trump actually did a ban, where the ban actually was created for Chinese citizens to come to the United States. It was definitely, at that time, there was approximately 15 people in the United States that had come down with the Chinese virus, and the first person actually died from the Chinese virus around the end of February, I believe, if I'm not mistaken. I think that's when it actually was. So, but yeah, it was definitely a virus that hit very, very hard. And a lot of people, and I guess from a personal perspective, I'm one of those that looked at this and said, it's the flu. That was me. That I will not deny that one bit. That's what I said. This is not that big of a deal. It's the flu. Wasn't really looking at much detail, just attaching it to, or kind of looking at it like it was just the same as all other pandemics or epidemics that we've had in the past. And that's where, I was concerned. I felt like we were going too far overboard right off the bat.
Yeah.
Right.
And,
going off that, I think we saw that a lot in the US. There was a very clear divide of people who were like, yeah, this is a big problem. We need to quarantine or isolate, keep your social bubble. There was worries about the hospitals being overwhelmed and being able to have enough beds and ventilators for people. And then we also had the people who were like, oh, this isn't, that big, like it's just another flu, like it's, we'll deal with it type of thing. So there definitely was that divide. And I think there still is that divide.
Oh, definitely still is.
Like there's people who don't believe in it still or don't think it's that big of a deal still. So
Yeah, going off that, I have some sources here to talk about, but first, like initial reactions to the beginning of this, from my perspective, like in January and February, I'd see news articles about, what was going on in China and like thinking to myself, whoa, like that's, everything's shutting down there. It sounds like it's, kind of a mess, but I'm like, oh, it's us in the United States, we don't have to worry about it. It's just another like, epidemic, that started in China. That's just gonna, it's gonna be them, maybe some other places, but around there, but not anything that's gonna affect us is what I thought. And then I found an article from ABC News about the first reported case coming to the United States was from January 21st, 2020, and just talked about how there was the first confirmed case. It was in Washington State at that point. And then, as time went on, like areas like San Francisco, Seattle, New York City, all of a sudden started having more and more cases, but life pretty much went on as normal through January, February, and the beginning of March. And then I found an article from CNN from dated March 16th, 2020. It was just about Trump contradicting Fauci by saying that it's under control and everything's fine. But then I had some quotes here from Fauci I thought were interesting. He was asked whether like hundreds of thousands of Americans could die from the coronavirus, which I think at that point it wasn't declared a pandemic until like a day or two after this interview. And he said, when asked if hundreds of thousands of people could die, he said it could happen and it could be worse. He added that the limits on public life were designed to try and make that not happen. And he said, and quote, if we go about our daily lives and not worry about everything, the death toll could be high. And then he said, people sometimes think I'm overreacting. I like that when people think I'm overreacting because that means we're doing it just right. He also didn't rule down a national lockdown in order to stop the spread of the virus. And this was March 16th.
Yeah, going back to your how you mentioned that the first cases were in Washington, and in my New York Times article that I mentioned before, the governor of Washington State basically like asked President Trump to take things more seriously because that was one of the first states where things really started to get bad, and he was seeing that, and he felt there wasn't a big enough push nationally to help prevent things from spreading. So that just made me think of that article.
Something else too, I didn't find an article on it, but like just current events that were happening kind of as the coronavirus was starting to become a bigger deal. Remember, we did have the impeachment trial that was all over the news, and that's what Congress and everyone was worried about. They weren't as focused on this or as maybe as prepared for this as they could have been, and them dealing with that might have been because of it.
Well, yeah. Oh, I'm sorry, Lydia. Ben, talking about that. Yeah, you're right. At that point, there was the sole focus of pretty much every politician was that. But I think it was, Lydia, you said the first case that came to the United States was like July or January 21st, something like that.
Oh, yeah, Ben mentioned that.
Oh, Ben said that. Well, Trump basically did the travel ban on January 23rd. And he took that from secretary, or he got that information. I shouldn't say got that information, but was basically advised by the Secretary of Human Services, Secretary Azar, who actually said at that time that we needed to do that. And Trump went ahead and did that at that time, which was actually kind of interesting because everybody else was so focused on the impeachment. That's all they cared about. That's all they talked about. Nobody, other than Fauci, Trump, and that's what they were looking at. And the Health Services Secretary Azar, they were looking at this, which I have to give them credit for that, because it actually did put it into the perspective of the organization from January 22nd. That's when they actually started saying that this was going to become a worldwide pandemic. So he went with that right on January 23rd, which, I mean, no matter what anybody says, I mean, that timeline there is pretty significant, I think. So
Yeah, no, I agree. And again, that kind of goes with the both sides. Like, people are like, either, yeah, he did a good job in being proactive, or no, he wasn't proactive enough. So again, we see those two kind of sides debating.
Yeah.
But transitioning to kind of our next topic, when things started to close down in the US, I know, especially in Wisconsin, this was kind of a big deal. There was a lot of backlash against Governor Evers about whether or not he was making the right choice. And I have a quote from, let's see, what is this from? The WPR, an WPR article, and the Republican Party of Wisconsin Chair Andrew Hitt gave some criticism, saying that Tony Evers caused mass confusion for people and businesses across Wisconsin. So there's just kind of backlash, like he just kind of sprung this on people without any warning. And a lot of people were worried that with the shutdown, with closing businesses, or non-essential businesses, that these places were going to go out of business and it was going to hurt the economy. And so in response to that, Tony Evers says, of course you want a strong economy, but we do have to value human life at some point at a higher level than businesses.
To add on to what Lydia just said, so she's talking about the safer at home order that Governor Evers issued on March 23rd of 2020, which it would take effect March 25th of 2020. So it closed all non-essential businesses. And at that point, like she said, there was a lot of backlash from, Wisconsin residents about that, because the numbers on March 23rd, the day he issued this, we only had 457 total positive cases in the whole state, and we had 5 deaths at that point. So people understandably were angry that, especially small business owners, that their business has to be closed for an undetermined amount of time, not, having to still try to, pay for, their, rents or mortgages or everything. And then you're not making any money in that process. So it's obviously detrimental to the economy. And he said, in a quote from that article, he said, talked about how individuals don't need special permission to leave their homes, but they must comply with this order when it is permissible to leave home, said Governor Evers. He said, in quotes, similarly, if a business is an essential business or operation as defined in this order, it does not need documentation or certification to continue its work that is done in compliance with this order. So gas stations, grocery stores, pet stores, those are some of the main ones that could stay open. I don't know if anyone else has something to add to that.
Actually, I do. So, Ben, earlier in your quote from Dr. Fauci, he said that generally, if they overreact and react early, that means they handled this right. I believe I'm probably misremembering a little bit of that.
That's what he said, yes.
Yeah. I can't help but wonder if Governor Evers, and I hope this doesn't sound too political or anything, but I can't help but wonder if the approach he was trying to take was kind of following Fauci's advice in that cracking down on this thing before too many people got affected, because he said there were only 5 deaths and only a little over 400 people infected in Wisconsin. So I can't help but wonder if, one, if that was the approach he was trying to take, and 2, if even waiting a little longer for people to take this thing more seriously to react would have been better overall, considering how things actually played out here in Wisconsin.
I agree. One other thing to add to to Evers' safer at home order. A week before this, on